Live, this is our second half, a new topic. ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਸਕਰੀਨ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ. We're going to be discussing the national audit on child sexual grooming. ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਮਈ 2017 ਤੇ ਜਾਈਏ 7-8 ਸਾਲ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ, ਹਾਂਜੀ, ਇੱਕ BBC ਦਾ ਡਰਾਮਾ ਆਇਆ ਸੀ 3 girls, 3 ਲੜਕੀਆਂ ਬਾਰੇ in Rochdale ਤੇ Rotherham. ਤੇ ਉਹ ਲੜਕੀਆਂ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਗੋਰੀਆਂ ਕੇਅਰ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, they were looked after in the care system. ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਕਹਾਣੀ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਗਰੂਮ ਕਰਕੇ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਸ਼ੋਸ਼ਣ ਕੀਤਾ, ਪਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਟੈਕਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ. ਬਹੁਤਾ ਇਹੀ ਸੀਗਾ ਵੀ ਉਹ ਲੜਕੀਆਂ ਇੱਕ ਚਾਈਲਡ ਪ੍ਰੋਸਟੀਟਿਊਟ ਆ, ਵੀ ਉਹ ਖਰਾਬ ਆ, ਵੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਪਰਵਾਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦਾ.
ਵਰਕਿੰਗ ਕਲਾਸ ਆ,
ਹਾਂ, ਵੀ ਵਰਕਿੰਗ ਕਲਾਸ. ਇਨਫੈਕਟ ਇੱਕ ਲਫ਼ਜ਼ ਵਰਤਿਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀ, ਇਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਵਾਈਟ ਟਰੈਸ਼. ਤੇ ਉਦੋਂ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਰਿਕਾਰਡ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਗੈਂਗ ਸੀਗੇ ਵੀ ਕੌਣ ਜ਼ਿੰਮੇਵਾਰ ਸੀ. ਉਦੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਵੀ ਉੱਦਾਂ ਵੀ ਕਾਮਨ ਸੈਂਸ ਦੱਸਦੀ ਉਹ ਸੀਗੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਟੈਕਸੀ 9 ਟੈਕਸੀ ਸੀਨ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਨਵੋਲਵ, ਔਰ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨੀ ਮੁਸਲਿਮ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਸੀ. ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੀਕਿਊਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਿ ਉਸ ਦਿਨਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਮਨਜੀਤ ਰਿਕਾਰਡ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀ, ਸੋ ਉਦੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਡੇਟਾ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਕੌਣ ਹੈ ਤਾਂ ਕੌਣ ਨਹੀਂ. ਪਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਫਿਰ ਬਾਅਦ 'ਚ ਕਈ ਸਾਲ ਬਾਅਦ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੀਕਿਊਸ਼ਨਸ ਹੋਏ ਆ, ਜਦੋਂ ਫਿਰ ਕੇਸ ਆਇਆ ਕੋਰਟਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਫਿਰ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗਣ ਲੱਗ ਪਿਆ ਵੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਦੇਅਰਸ ਅ ਪੈਟਰਨ ਹੇਅਰ,
ਇਹ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਇਦਾਂ ਦਾ ਕੰਮ.
ਸੋ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਫਾਸਟ ਫਾਰਵਰਡ ਕਰੋ ਪਿੱਛੇ, ਜਦੋਂ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਟਰੰਪ ਨੇ ਹੀ ਬਿਕੇਮ ਦ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ, ਇਹਨੇ ਈਲਨ ਮਸਕ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣਾ ਐਡਵਾਈਜ਼ਰ ਬਣਾਇਆ ਸੀ. ਤਾਂ ਈਲਨ ਮਸਕ ਨੇ ਉਦੋਂ ਇੱਕ ਕੈਂਪੇਨ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, UK ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਚਾਈਲਡ ਸੈਕਸ਼ੂਅਲ ਗਰੂਮਿੰਗ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਇਹ ਤੇ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਕਵਰ ਅਪ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ, ਇਹ ਤੇ ਛਪਾਇਆ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ, ਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਇਨਕੁਆਇਰੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਆ. ਤੇ ਉਦੋਂ ਵੈਸੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਲੇਬਰ ਦਾ ਕੇਸ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਲੋੜ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ, ਲੂਈਸ ਕੇਸੀ ਉਹ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਆ ਆਡਿਟ, ਤੇ ਉਹਨੇ ਫਿਰ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਬਾਅਦ 'ਚ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ. ਪਰ ਅੰਡਰ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ਼ਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਹੁਣ ਆਡਿਟ ਜਿਹੜੀ 16 ਜੂਨ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਪਬਲਿਸ਼ ਹੋਈ ਸੀਗੀ, ਤੇ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਵੈਸੇ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਰეკਮੈਂਡੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਆ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰੂੰਗੇ. ਲੇਬਰ ਨੇ ਜੋ ਇੱਥੇ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਨੇ ਐਕਸੈਪਟ ਕਰ ਲਏ, ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਇੰਪਲੀਮੈਂਟ ਕਰੂੰਗੇ. ਤੇ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਵਨ ਆਫ ਦ ਰეკਮੈਂਡੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਇਨਕੁਆਇਰੀ, ਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਵਿਊ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਆਫ ਆਲ ਦ ਕੇਸਿਸ, ਹੈ ਨਾ. ਤੇ ਇਹ ਲੂਈਸ ਕੋਸੀ ਦੀ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹਦੀ ਪਿਕਚਰ ਵੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, I'm going to quote from that. ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਵੀ the report calls out of a collective failure of the police, of local authority councils, of the politicians and of social services. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਹੀ ਕਿਹਾ ਵੀ they all failed to protect these vulnerable children. And ਇਹ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਵੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ethnic sensitivities ਆ and the phase of racism, ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਵੀ ਬੋਲੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਯਾਨੀ ਕਿ ਕੁਛ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤਾ. ਤੇ ਇਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਮ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਅਫਵਾਹਾਂ, ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਰੂਮਰਸ ਪੈਦਾ ਹੋਏ. ਸੋ ਕਾਫੀ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰეკਮੈਂਡੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ. ਤਾਂ ਤੀਜੀ ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਆ ਵੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਇਸ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਹੁਤਾ ਇਹੀ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਕੇਅਰ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਲੜਕੀਆਂ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਕੇਸਿਸ ਬਹੁਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਸੀ, ਪਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਗਰੂਮਿੰਗ ਦਾ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਗੈਂਗਸ ਦਾ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਛੋਟੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਨਾ, ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਕੂਲਾਂ 'ਚ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਬ੍ਰੈਡਫੋਰਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਉਦੋਂ ਵੀ ਸਕੂਲ ਦੇ ਬਾਹਰ ਇਹ ਗੈਂਗ ਖੜੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀ, ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਉਦੋਂ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਟੱਕਰ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ. ਸੋ some people said this has been going on for 30-40 years. ਤੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਇਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨੀ ਆ, ਤਾਂ ਥੋੜਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਇਹਦਾ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦਾ ਪੱਖ ਵੀ ਲੈਣਾ. ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਡੇ ਵੀਰ ਭਾਈ ਅਮਰੀਕ ਸਿੰਘ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੇ. ਅਮਰੀਕ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਆਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਭਾਈ ਜਗਤਾਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ, ਤਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਵੀਰ ਜੀ ਹਰਵਿੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ as well. He's a police officer, so maybe he's got an angle.
Retired.
You're retired.
So he's retired. He's speaking for himself.
He can speak for himself.
ਮੈਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਵੀ since KC report publish ਹੋਈ ਆ, and ਤੁਸੀਂ safeguarding ਵੀ ਆ, you're not safeguarding, so it's not, you're not coming from a blind position here.
ਨਹੀਂ ਪਤਾ.
You've led a campaign to highlight the absence of the Sikh voice in this whole issue and in the report. What are your specific concerns? What recognition or action are you demanding?
I think what it is the recognition that when they're talking about survivors, they're mainly talking about
white, working class,
white,
looked after children,
looked
girls,
after children.
Yeah.
And that was not the only cohort.
Right.
And I think if you look back in terms of the people that have been active in this area, trying to highlight what has been happening up and down the country, a fair proportion of those people were from the Sikh community.
The people who were campaigning
to strike, to bring it to the fore.
But they weren't listened to it.
They
wasn't
not
heard.
only were they not listened to, I think the issue is that if you delve into the cases that occurred, there were individuals that were charged, there were individuals that were brought before the courts, there were accusations by the children that were being groomed by these people against their parents. And that's been borne out by the whole process, by the way Baroness Casey has described what's happened to the survivors
but she doesn't mention the ethnicity of the survivors.
She doesn't mention the ethnicity, but I'm saying it's been borne out in terms of the description and the manner that those individuals. As an example,
but if one
as an example, I'll give you one example.
Go on then.
She talks about children being branded as an example. Some of them are horrific, so I don't want to go into the details. I know of specific cases against both Sikh and Hindu girls, where they were also branded. The concern that I have is this is so big, that it needs that they need to take into account and bring all the people, all the communities that have suffered as a result of this activity, and they should also have a voice and be allowed to bring forth their evidence in terms of for the process to be listened to.
Let me come in on that one, because I know Harvey's not here to represent the police force, but he's got some, obviously experience. The report calls national data a disaster. That it was just almost to the point where there was maybe there was a conspiracy not to take that seriously, not to record that. And I know one of the arguments was that the attitude was that these are child prostitutes, so who cares, Would you accept that there's been failings on the police, or do you think that's a misrepresentation?
I think that, first of all, I welcome Louise Casey's report and agree with it. I think we have to just understand where she's coming from as well. So when she talks about institutional failure, what am I looking here? So within institutional failure, there's three aspects mainly. One is the corruption, one is accountability, and the other one is the inefficiencies within the system. So corruption has been highlighted, that perhaps there was corruption in the sense that we want to bury it. So then you've got to look at why that was
buried.
Why is it coming about? And she looked at three forces: the Yorkshire forces, West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, and GMP, where you have high populations of Pakistani Muslims.
Of course, when we say Pakistan Muslims, Kashmiri भी है, Punjabi भी है. So who are we aiming at? I don't understand that.
That's part of the problem. We're going to come to that, but let's just finish up with the police. We'll come to that issue in a minute. Right?
So within policing, we have our own coding system. Now that is normally used for stop and search. It's not used across the board for all offences.
But some forces were recording ethnicity and other forces weren't. Why was that?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? This is down to the inefficiencies. This is down to the forces, chief constables, for example, saying this is how I want to run my particular force. They do receive challenges from certain organisations within policing itself. I'm talking about staff associations, and they will make representations. It's how you make those representations. This is talking to power. There's a way of talking to power.
Of course it is.
Now, being involved previously within the Sikh Police Association, we made those noises. We made it at a political level. And if you recall, when Rishi Sunak was in power, he called it out then, and so did the Home Secretary, specifically saying Pakistani grooming gangs. At that time, do you know, we won't say how we got to that position where we wanted them to publicly announce that. And we almost gave reassurance from Sikh Associate, well, I did anyway, to say that you'll get support from the Sikh community. We didn't stand up at that time.
Right.
Let me explore that.
But they do mention Asian as well, so that's a bit confusion as well there.
Yeah.
So
I just want to bring Jagtar in. I just want to bring Jagtar in here because we mentioned that they said that there might be corruption, and you know there is an issue around Labour councils. You know, Rotherham, Bradford Council, Rochdale, and that there's some suggestion that maybe it was in those councils that data wasn't collected, and that was because of pressure on politicians and the police by, you know, community leaders. I don't know if I'm not saying that that'll be to be investigated, but do you think that, you know, politicians are all I mean, you're not a politician, but you're close to Labour politicians.
I mean,
you
could
know?
they be part of it? Yeah.
So I think,
you know, vote bank
I think
politics
the national inquiry is to establish just that.
Yeah, where the vote bank politics was playing, just like in India,
Again.
Pakistan, vote banks.
Yeah. So the national inquiry is to establish just well, part of it is to establish that.
Yeah.
And so there is concern, but it'll get borne out in facts when the inquiry concludes. I think for us in the Sikh community, Minu yaad hai, back in the 1990s and the late 80s when I was studying, and our Sikh activists then, Guru Ghar jaake kehndे ਸੀ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਬਚਾਓ
ਇਹਦਾ ਭਰਾ ਹੀ ਜਨਮ ਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ
ਨਿਰਮਲ ਸਿੰਘ ਸੋ ਗੁਰੂ ਘਰ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਬਚਾਓ because ਆ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਹੋ ਰਹੀਆਂ and I remember back in the late 80s and the 90s but our voices never got heard. That is the truth. Our voices, when I remember when...
but what did our community do? When they heard all that, what did they do?
No, so our community, to be honest, played its part in the sense, those Sikh activists that went into the Gurdwara and said those things, some of our community said, well, you know, it's not happening. But many of the parivar si, ਉਹ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਸੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ history ਵੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਦੱਸਦੀ ਆ ਕਿ we have to be careful.
Yes, of course.
So I think that if I move forward a decade or a decade and a bit,
but there is a reason for that. I mean, I was active in the 80s in anti-racist movements, and I know that we were under attack from the far right. And the last thing we wanted to do was give them ammunition by dividing the community. So there might have been good reasons why we didn't want to get divided because there was a common enemy, you know.
Let's Marie come in.
Says this, right? You know, we can see any coffee coach kar sakde hain. The fact of the matter is there was a conspiracy of silence. Over the decades, that children were being abused.
Of course.
So
there's no doubt about that.
All of us, Benji, we were involved in anti-racist movements.
Of course.
We were involved in all of these other activities because we grew up in the UK and we know exactly what we're talking about. But the point that I'm making is, as you said earlier on, when you went to school, people coming in the taxis, then
but the
point what I'm trying to say is this, right? There was a conspiracy of silence. Some of us actually sat on police liaison committees. We brought it up in the police liaison committees. There was still a conspiracy of silence then, because they always, if you look at the media as well, they always brandished us Asian, and there were letters from Sikh organisations. Just take for a random network of Sikh organisations. Lord Indrajit Singh, he raised it in the House of Lords. There were other incidences where, if you look at going back into those so-called far-right people, not that I've met any of these people, I don't get involved myself in that, but if you look at them coming onto programs on certain channels, they would get an audience. I'm talking about reputable journalists as well that tried to bring this to the fore. They would be brought onto a program, a reputable program, and so-called reputable journalists would have an audience there to target those individuals because what they were saying was unpalatable.
What about the social workers? Were they speaking out?
That's what I said. I used the word conspiracy of silence. If you look at the reports, and I'm sure Baji would have seen those same reports that I saw. The terminology they used to use for children was, what was it? That this is a lifestyle choice. Yeah, or this is the life that this individual is choosing to lead.
Difficult girls.
Yeah, they've got a difficult upbringing and so forth.
Yeah.
There are cases after cases. I know cases from Leeds, where they'll tell you specific cases where children were groomed in those cities. They were helped by the Sikh community, and they were brought out of those communities. Yeah, and somebody in those communities informed others where those people were, and those children ended up back with.
There was a case in Dewsbury, I think, where there were actually 8 to 15 Sikh girls who were. I mean, often it was under the cloak of conversions. These girls have converted.
Yeah, but the point I'm trying to make is this, and I'm not trying to bring in just the Sikh perspective.
Yeah.
If you just think about when they're talking about thousands and thousands of white
girls. Yeah.
The survivors they're talking about.
Yeah.
What's happened to those girls that didn't survive?
Well,
where are they?
So that's going to be part of the inquiry, isn't it, Harvey?
I'm
to
not
dig
sure
out
because they're at the moment focusing.
They're going to review all the cases. That's the whole point. They're going to review.
I don't
every
think they'll
case,
review all the cases. They'll just review,
including maybe
cases.
those girls that were prosecuted as well, to review those convictions as well, Harvey.
I think it will be wide-ranging, and that's what Baroness Casey is asking for. Now, I think we have to understand from a policing point of view and from the institutional point of view why we ignore some of these girls. And I think we have to understand that the institutions themselves didn't understand the issue.
Right.
For example, the judge called one of the girls that she was wayward girl.
Right.
So, and it's the language that when I joined policing 30 plus years ago, which was around domestic abuse, and how we dealt with it. It's a family matter. It's nothing to
do with the police.
We don't get involved in that.
Yeah.
Fast forward 30 years.
It takes two sides.
We haven't got the evidence, so go and stay at your parents for tonight or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, we didn't want to get involved. We didn't understand the problem. Nowadays, if there's an opportunity for an arrest in the matter of domestic abuse, police officers go for that. We have to take these grooming gangs to the same level. Where there's suspicion, we need to be locking up people straight away. But whether that happens or not, we'll
so
have
was
to see.
it to do with the races, like the Musliman, they are doing it, and they were doing it. So why did people stay quiet? Because it to do with racism, that they want to be labelled as...
Well, this is the point, Jagtar. I want to come to you on this one. There's no doubt that in the convictions, we're speaking about a fact now. Pakistani Muslims, and as Amrik said, that even the politicians now, the Labour politicians and others have mentioned that. But there is a danger here, because even though there might be hundreds of cases, there might be thousands of cases. We know the vast majority of child abuse takes place within the family. That's the first thing.
Yeah, of course.
And secondly, we've got 700,000 Pakistani Muslim population. So it's a tiny, tiny proportion, and I'm sure most Muslim Pakistanis are horrified about this behaviour.
Of course, yeah.
So we need to be careful that we don't label this as a Pakistani Muslim crime.
As a
just
big
like
number.
in the 80s and 70s, there was mugging was labelled as a black men's crime.
Let me just say what our brethren in the Muslim community are saying.
Tell me what they're saying.
I think it was the other day, the website, I think it's called, whether you can report hate crime against Muslims. I forget the Tell Mama. Tell Mama. Yeah. He came on and he acknowledged this was happening within the Pakistani Muslim community. And that was very brave of him to do that. He acknowledged this was going on. But
it's happening in other communities as well.
But not this type of abuse.
Okay.
And when you talk about it within the family, I think the other concern in this is because of the hands-off approach, because we're talking about, because Baroness Casey is quite rightly pointed out, it's men that commit this crime mainly.
Marik, there can be a big number. I understand that, Musliman Pakistan, but you can't say the whole. You can't say the whole.
Nobody is saying the whole of Pakistan. You see, I don't want to use any particular anecdotes because
stereotyping.
Because there are people within the Pakistani community who are stereotyping people from their own community. They're saying it's from a particular area.
Right.
But that's not for me to say that.
No.
What I'm saying is that that's for them to answer those questions.
I think for us, it's not actually who it is, what our concern is, okay, when we were talking about some of these issues, that whether it's the white community or our community, we weren't being listened to. And I'll give you a couple of examples. When the incident in Leicester happened, and we were in Sea Council at the time, and I remember speaking to officers at the time. So this is after the Leicester incident. And they were saying, well, your community might be complaining about it, but they don't come forward, so we have no data.
Yeah, that's what we haven't got.
So and we were saying, well, actually, the community does come forward, but the community is not believed. So you need to be making sure that you document that data.
Well, that's it.
That's down to yourselves, how you take the data in. It's not down to the community.
No.
But so there were always sort of barriers being put up, or reasons why things aren't happening. And I think, and that's been unfortunate from us. I don't think that we, over the last 20, 30 years as a community, when there have been issues, we have tried to register them, and how the police have then taken that forward is down to what the police internal working is like.
Harvey, I just want to cut Harvey a second, because the other concern is this. There's massive amount of Islamophobia taking place. We know that because we've got the data. I'm not saying that there isn't racism against Sikhs and other groups. And the far right are playing this now big time. Are we not giving them an open goal there by almost, and it's the far right that have been pushing this, we need to label them as Pakistani Muslim. So it's a very careful kind of balancing act that we have to do here.
It is, and I think we have to be careful in this. Now, when we talk about grooming in the house, that's one thing. Yeah. But this report is about grooming gangs.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
and
right.
when we go back 20, 30 years, what's happened is when the Sikh community reported, or any girls reported it, they weren't believed.
No, they weren't.
We're accepting that now. Now, because they were ignored, what's happened is those one or two groomers, they've refined the grooming system over the years, and where it's been upscaled. So where you had one or two girls being groomed, you've got hundreds of girls being groomed, and then the perpetrators, where it was just 2 or 3 people, they've recruited others, and it's it's almost like an industrial scale now, that within pockets of certain communities, this is an activity.
So basically, you're trying to say that gang got bigger.
So in that
bigger number.
The activity of the process got bigger.
I must really
come on.
You come in.
A bit,
go on.
If you look at some UN reports, there was genocidal grooming and raping of people by certain sections in East Pakistan. Is well documented. Now, if you then bring it over to certain families in this country, sadly, some of the people that we talk about, people talk about generational abuse happening within families. If you look at the generation, you'll probably find, and this Baroness Casey sort of hinted at that, that people were passing these girls around to family members, family groupings. There's talk about a feudal system. Now, what I'm saying is that until somebody speaks truth to power and says this is happening, I myself have sat down with people, because one of the other sides, the flip sides to this was, when we said that we raised it with the police and so forth, was exactly what happened in that place in Leicester. But pre that, there is a lot of anecdotal evidence that some of these activities actually helped in the rise of the far right in areas where they felt they were under threat. It also there was also a rise in groups forming within Sikhs and
so there's a pattern
communities to protect themselves, because simply the authorities would not believe them that this was actually happening.
So
they felt that they talked about what they would talk about to if a family says, "Oh, my daughter's, she's making her own choice."
So I think that's really important. As I kind of it's really delicate issue as well, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਾਡਾ ਸਿੱਖ ਧਰਮ ਸਰਬੱਤ ਦਾ ਭਲਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਮਾਨਸ ਕੀ ਜਾਤ. So we're not even allowed to discriminate against any community. But I think ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ we're going with the facts, and if the facts are saying that within a certain community there are these patterns that have been going on for years and years, intergenerational, then you can't simply say it's a few bad apples. That's the point, isn't it?
That's right.
You have to say that there's something within the mindset within the community that needs to be addressed. Would that be fair?
In part, yes.
Yeah.
So what I will say is that system that is being refined over generations within groups.
That's it,
the challenges that the authorities have is when they speak to the person being groomed. It's very difficult because she doesn't see that she is being groomed at the time. And now, as police officers,
because they separate their minds from what's going on, their body.
Well, the thing is, you've got a complaint. You've got a complaint from the parents saying, okay, Tika.
They think it's a norm and a sort of.
Well, it's not a question of being the norm. It is when you speak to the girl, she's not making the allegations that the parents.
Right, okay.
So with police officers, we can only work on what the victim is saying.
So no. These were 13-year-old, 14-year-old.
These are young girls.
So this is where we've got to be able to bring in the parents and where they can take some primacy in.
But the social workers were not even reporting it for days on end. They were disappearing, those girls.
That's the problem.
They were disappearing, but the issue was that parents were not believed. And actually what would happen is that in certain cases, the child, at the hands of those people that were grooming that child, they would report them of being, they're trying to force me into marriage, or they're beating me up. I can't talk about the cases I've dealt with because for quite over the years, I've seen it firsthand. And sadly, the truth of the matter is that all institutions, and this is where I agree with Harvey, because either they weren't willing to listen, or they had different structural reporting mechanisms on these cases. I knew of a centre where girls were being taken, and that the people in taxis and cars would turn up there, forcibly take them out of the home. So what I'm saying is that until the police and social services, the colleagues in health, and centrally at the Home Office and so forth, until they actually get to grips with this issue, that's and that in itself, sad reality is that in itself. If that's not dealt with, will thrive the fans of Islamophobia.
Jagtar, I want to bring you in here because you're in the space of making Gurdwaras more effective. I know the safeguarding, and we talked about that in the Gurdwara handbook, is to do with the safeguarding within Gurdwara spaces. But one of the allegations amongst maybe some of the Sikh youth groups is that the Gurdwaras are not interested in protecting the girls. We have to do it ourselves. And in fact, we often feel that they're working against us. Is there a role for the Gora Committees to be more proactive in this space?
So, absolutely. And with the ICSA report and the recommendations, one of the recommendations are that they're looking at mandatory reporting. So which means you have no choice. If a complaint comes in, you will have no choice but to report that. So what we've covered the ICSA report.
So you could have a safeguarding officer in the Gurdwara who could also be a contact point for somebody in the community if they fear that their daughter's being groomed.
Or if it happens on premises.
Okay.
So I think so we've covered the ICSA report in detail in the handbook. We've covered the actual the recommendations from the ICSA report, and the reason we've done it so that Gurdwara are aware of their responsibility going forward. So so I think and that's what we talk about, being a support base for Gurdwara. What we don't want is for Gurdwaras to be ignorant of the law, because they say ignorance of the law is no defence. So going forward, this ICSA report that's come out, recommendation by recommendation, they will be implemented. And the government said they are going to implement all the recommendations. So we've listed those recommendations which will apply to Gurdwara, and Gurdwara will need training, they'll need help, and they'll need support. and we are one of those that can provide that. Amrik, that he could provide it as he's got his experience, and others can provide it. We will be one of those that can help.
Avi, I just want to ask you, like someone in the Gurdwara is sexually abused, and they're very vulnerable and they're very frightened for their life because the other person, the perpetrator, is threatening the child or an adult, say. If you tell such and such, I'll do this to you or to your family. Where do you have
go?
the ground with the police or?
Yeah, it comes down to a couple of things. One, who's making those threats, and if it's a person in a position of trust, that changes the complexion of the investigation because the one.
Well, there's plenty of cases, or certainly of concerns that some preachers and some grantees in some Gurdwaras are getting away with blue murder.
They are, and that's down to the Gurdwara's approach in terms of how they handle it. They
so
consider they're
protecting the groomers then.
There is an element of that. That has happened. Where I think we all know of cases where there's something untoward that's been going on and people know about it, and rather the Gurdwara committee is tackling it, they just kind of move the problem on to another Gurdwara, and that's bang out of order. So that needs to change. And if I could just say that the groups that are saying Gurdwaras don't want to know about this problem, I think that's a bit unfair.
That's really
because
unfair,
Gurdwaras, they want to do
they
the right thing.
They should be concerned.
They are concerned, and the Gurdwaras that I've been liaising with since 2013, they've put their money where their mouth is. In the West Midlands, when we started talking about grooming with the police, or we were in a position to do so, we were saying to the senior officer, this needs to be addressed. And I remember speaking to a superintendent saying, we haven't got the money for that, get the money. And the following day, I went to Carl Gurdwara in Warsaw, Plant Gurdwara and the Warsaw Sikh Forum, and they all gave £500, say, here's your money. And that was the same amount of money that I needed to kickstart a programme within Warsaw. And what that did was that embedded Operational Sentinel within the West Midlands Police. Initially, we thought that was going to be for a short window, just talk about grooming. But that still exists till today.
Of course,
within Operational Sentinel, they look at grooming, domestic abuse, FGM, forced marriages, modern-day slavery, etc. So it's grown. And I think the Sikh community should take pride that they set something in motion 2013. It's part of the system within policing today, within West Midlands Police anyway. If we can sit at the right tables, like Baji was saying, then the Sikh voice should be heard, and we have the experience and the inner knowledge with the community, that because it's been going on with our community for decades.
Well, this is the point I was going to bring to Amrik. Amrik, I mean, we thankfully now we have Sikhs in academia. We have Sikhs in law. We have police Sikh associates. We have doctors. We have social workers. We have now professionals. Is this the moment for them now to rise and to be part of this inquiry? To
work together.
Because apne hathi apne. What do you think, Jagtar? Is this the moment for? Because the Gurdwaras, let's be honest, on a skill set,
they're doing the best what they can. But
I think
we need to shift
the point
it.
that I'm making is this, right? Those people that have been involved in this, both from a community aspect, they need to be acknowledged. Because they have spent their life trying to deal with these issues. And secondly, the professionals that you speak about, and we've all been in positions of trust ourselves. I think it's time that they spoke out and then came to the fore as well. To try to articulate and then get this matter looked at in a way that's going to satisfy all people. And there is this fear at the moment, in communities, that this is a way of kicking into the long grass, because it's so difficult.
3-4 years as well.
It's so difficult to deal with.
But we don't need to wait for that. We can start our own inquiry now.
Well, people have already started their own. Other groups have, because don't forget, if you look at the call for national inquiry, there's a certain political party says, if you're not going to call it, we're going to go ahead and do it ourselves, which I think they've started.
Okay,
we can't circumvent the inquiry that's going to come in place. I think we need to try to work with them, but there's nothing wrong with starting our process to identify the victims and trying to bring them.
Okay, we've got about 8 minutes left. We're going to but we'll finish it. I think 10 बजे तक प्रोग्राम रखूंगे 7-8 मिनट रह गए ਜੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਕਾਲ ਕਰਨੀ ਆ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ. I know it's a delicate issue and they're probably more interested to hear it. You know, where do we go as a community? This issue is a wake-up call, isn't it, for our community? Where do we go?
So I think the community's been aware of this issue, this particular issue, and I think where we can, we should always be part of these inquiries. And those, like Amrit Singh said, that have played their part in recent times, recent decades, they should definitely play their part. And some of the organisations you've mentioned, Ghulam Singh, they should also, because they are professional organisations, they can articulate the Sikh narrative into this inquiry. So I think definitely we should play our part. And sometimes we as a community have this sort of way, chalo ho pare, we move on, dust ourselves off. But we shouldn't do that. With this inquiry, we should play our part.
That's right.
Because we do have concerns, and the community has for many decades. So that's as much as I can say on that.
For me, it's not about the concerns itself. For me, it's to do with the victims.
That's right. Yeah.
It's to do with the survivors, and it's to do with those children that are now women.
Of course.
If they've survived, where are they?
Yeah.
If they haven't survived and we can't locate them, what's happened to them?
Yeah. Some of them must have
committed
suicide as well.
But somebody needs to bring to the
That's
fore.
something that we need to do now. We can't wait 3-4 years.
Yeah. So there needs to be a process, and that's why I suggested that we need to get as many names as possible of people that have survived this process, and names of people that haven't survived this process, because it would, at the very least, it would be good to know that they're still alive. And if they're not alive, there's a crime that's been committed. And
they're too frightened to come out.
Well, that sounds a bit like
it's very sensitive.
Sounds a bit like what happened in Punjab with just Kadra's work, where in a sense, undocumented victims. So in some senses, at least we can do that, Harvey. We can begin to now to document those crimes, even if we can't do anything about it.
I think we have to remember there are lots of Sikh organisations, Sikh groups who have been involved in the grooming aspect for many years.
But working in silos.
This is my point now. So they've been working almost independently of each other, not talking to each other, and they will have data and information. It's whether they would be willing to share that information and data, but more importantly, that information they hold and the data they hold needs to be accurate and not embellished in any sort of way.
Well, that's it.
So, I mean, who's going to get the heads together? Is it Gurdwara Aid, Sikh Council UK? So we've got so many bodies that seem to be just totally redundant and ineffective.
So I think, hence why I've said the victims' story needs to be narrated, articulated in such a way that it hits the inquiry, and it has to be those groups that have been dealing with this for a number of years or decades. If you some of the groups that you mentioned, and including Gordon, we're recent. We don't hold that information. We don't have access to that information. It has to be those that have access to the information, the people involved, the locations, the times, all that. And that's the sort of issue we have at hand.
ਦਰਸ਼ਕਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਕਰਨੀ ਆ ਬਾਣੀ ਚ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਜੇ ਜੀਵੇ ਪਤ ਲੱਥੀ ਜਾਏ ਸਭ ਹਰਾਮ ਜੇਤਾ ਕਿਸ਼ਕਾਏ ਸੰਗਤੋ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਪੱਤਾਂ ਲੱਥੀਆਂ ਜਾ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਧੀਆਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਭੈਣਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਤਾਂ ਕੁਝ ਤੱਕ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਪਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਅੱਖਾਂ ਮੀਟੀਆਂ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਨਾਲੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਗੁਰਸਿੱਖਿਆ ਹੁਣ ਇਹ ਮੌਕਾ ਆ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਐਜ਼ ਅ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਇੱਕ ਦੂਜੇ ਨਾਲ ਲੜਨ ਤੇ ਹੀ ਲਾਉਂਦੇ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਪੱਤਾਂ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਲੱਠੀਆਂ ਜਾ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਸੋ ਇਹ ਮੌਕਾ ਆ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਪਰਸਨਲ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ
ਇਸ਼ੂ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਪਾਸੇ ਕਰੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ
ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੁਬਾਰਕ ਪਰ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਸਾਂਝੇ
ਉੱਥੇ ਖੜੇ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਨਾ
ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨਾ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਧੀਆਂ ਭੈਣਾਂ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਸਾਂਝੀਆਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਇਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਦੀ ਕਹਾਵਤ ਹੈ ਬੜੀ ਇਹ ਸਾਂਝੀਆਂ
ਕਿਸੇ ਦੀ ਬਗਾਨੀਆਂ ਆ ਵੇ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ
ਪਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਫਿਰ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਨਾ ਤਾਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਬੜੇ ਆਉਂਦੇ
ਪਿੱਛੇ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ
this is the time for the community to wake up is it a wake up call
Well, it's always been a wake-up call because people have, as you've quite rightly put, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕ ਆਪਣੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਭੈਣ ਭਰਾ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆ They've been going around universities talking about this. They've been going into Gurdwaras talking about this. They've been talking to politicians about this. They've been talking to our colleagues in the police about this. You know, it's not as if this issue hasn't been raised. I know I raised it with the chief constable, previous chief constables in the West Midlands on a number of times, including inspectors as well. So it's not an issue that people weren't aware of.
But you've got this petition
from our point of view.
But you've got a petition going.
From
what support did you get for that petition?
It's not a petition. What I'm saying is that people should contact their MPs, contact their elected officials.
So what response have you got?
Yeah, from
it's out there at the moment. So I don't know. But what I would suggest is that if you're looking at from an academic research, it should be done by the academia. If you're looking at bringing people together, in terms of those people that have been active in this, that's another step that could be used. But there's different processes to get to that final stage, really.
Lord ji, ਆਪਾਂ time finish ਹੋ ਗਿਆ. I don't know if anything, Manjit, did you want to say anything?
No, I just want to thank you. I mean, you know, ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੈਂਸਿਟਿਵ ਆ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਧੀਆਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਮਾਵਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਜਾਂ ਭੈਣਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਇਹ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਤਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ turn in a blind eye to it and it's really bad. ਸਾਨੂੰ collectively ਕੰਮ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਇਸ ਤੇ and support ਇੱਕ ਦੂਜੇ ਨੂੰ ਦੇਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਆ ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਆ and I want to really thank you for ਜਿਹੜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ raise ਕੀਤੇ issue
and so ਤਿੰਨੇ ਵੀਰਾਂ ਦਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਆ.
Can I just say before you start wrapping up, we've talked about the institutions, we've talked about the processes and the inquiries, and within all of that, when Paji talked about the survivors, where are they? Okay, it's one thing knowing where they are. It's finding out what they want from the community.
Well, this is the
We've
thing.
ignored them.
Like I said, they might be frightened to come out to talk about anything.
Well, the thing is, they probably did raise it with their families and to the authorities. That we've ignored them, we've vilified them. She's gone with them.
On one side.
We've pushed them on one side, and we've, almost like it's put them aside.
ਚਲੋ ਇਹ ਵੈਸੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਉਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਆਮ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਪ੍ਰਿਸਟੀਨ ਕਲੀਨ ਪੇਸ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਪਰਫੈਕਟ ਹਾਂ
But we're not.
ਜਦੋਂ 1947 ਵਿੱਚ ਪਾਰਟੀਸ਼ਨ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ ਨਾ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਭੈਣਾਂ ਮਾਵਾਂ ਧੀਆਂ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਸਾਈਡ ਤੇ ਰਹਿ ਗਈਆਂ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਕਮਿਸ਼ਨ ਹੋਇਆ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਬਹਾਲ ਕਰਨਾ ਇੱਥੇ ਪਤਾ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਗਈਆਂ ਹੁਣ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ
they're not us.
ਤਾਂ ਉਹ ਮੁਸਲਮਾਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਭਾਗ ਗਈਆਂ ਸੀ ਜਾਂ ਖੁਦਕੁਸ਼ੀਆਂ ਲੈ ਲਈ ਸੀ ਇਹ ਫਿਊਡਲ ਐਟੀਟਿਊਡ ਹੈ ਸਾਡੀ ਦੈਟਸ ਅ ਫਿਊਡਲ ਐਟੀਟਿਊਡ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਫਿਊਡਲ ਐਟੀਟਿਊਡਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੱਟਣਾ ਪੈਣਾ ਇਹੀ ਫਿਊਡਲ ਐਟੀਟਿਊਡਸ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨੀ ਮੁਸਲਿਮ ਗਰੂਮਿੰਗ ਗੈਂਗਸ ਉਹੀ ਇਹ ਫਿਊਡਲ ਐਟੀਟਿਊਡ ਯੂਜ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਬੇਇੱਜ਼ਤੀ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਇਹ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਆ ਮਰ ਗਈ ਹੁਣ ਸਾਡੀ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ ਉਹੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਐਟੀਟਿਊਡ ਯੂਜ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਧੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ
That's right. And we've got to look at pathways to reintegrate them as respected, honoured members of our Sikh community.
So we've got a lot of work to do here. मैं बचन बंदियां भी असी PBC जे जिंदा रहा PBC struggling. ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਲਿਆਉਂਗੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀ ਤੋਂ ਡਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿਸੇ ਇੰਡੀਵਿਜੂਅਲ ਤੋਂ ਡਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਿਰਫ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਤੋਂ ਡਰ ਆ ਗੁਰੂ ਤੋਂ ਡਰ ਆ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸੱਚ ਬੋਲਣਾ ਇਹ ਸਾਡਾ ਧਰਮ ਹੈਗਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਬੋਲੂਗੇ ਸੱਚ ਬੇਸ਼ੱਕ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਚੰਗਾ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਜਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗਦਾ so these are challenging conversations whether we're talking about how our Goodwas function how society responds to child abuse systemic failure the institutional failure but we have to engage ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਡਿਊਟੀ ਆ ਸਾਡਾ ਤਾਂ ਧਰਮ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਵੀ ਵੀ ਸਟੈਂਡ ਅਪ ਫॉर ਦ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਗੁਰੂ ਤੇਗ ਬਹਾਦਰ ਜੀ ਦੀ 550 ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਉਹ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਗੁਰਪੁਰਬ ਮਨਾ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਗੁਰੂ ਤੇਗ ਬਹਾਦਰ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਸੀਸ ਤੇ ਆ ਪਰ ਸਿਰ ਨਾ ਤੇ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਦੂਜੀ ਕੌਮ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਸਿਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਸਿਧਾਂਤਕ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਸਹਿਮਤ ਇਹ ਸਾਡਾ ਟ੍ਰੈਡੀਸ਼ਨ ਹੈਗਾ ਅੱਜ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਕੁੜੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਵੀ ਸ਼ੋਸ਼ਣ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਤਾਂ ਦੂਜੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਜੇ ਗੋਰੀਆਂ ਲੜਕੀਆਂ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਬੱਚੀਆਂ
ਉਹ ਕਿਹੜੀ ਬਗਾਨੀਆਂ ਆ ਠੀਕ
ਆ ਜੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਮੁਸਲਮਾਨ ਬੱਚੀਆਂ ਨਾਲ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਫੇਰ ਵੀ ਖੜੇ ਹੋਵਾਂਗੇ ਇਹ ਸਾਡਾ ਧਰਮ ਆ ਪਰ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨਾ ਇਫ ਯੂ ਹੈਵ ਟੂ ਗੈਟ ਯਰ ਹਾਊਸ ਇਨ ਆਰਡਰ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਪਣਾ ਤਾਂ ਦੂਜਿਆਂ ਦਾ
ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੀ ਚੰਗਾ ਕਰਨਾ
ਸੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਵਿਲ ਕੀਪ ਦਿਸ ਡਿਸਕਸ਼ਨ ਗੋਇੰਗ ਐਂਡ ਵਿਲ ਕਾਲ ਵੀਰ ਬੈਕ ਐਂਡ
ਬਿਲਕੁਲ
ਇੱਥੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਮਾਪਤੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਚੈਨਲ ਦਾ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ
ਬਹੁਤ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਦੇਣਾ
ਬੋਲਦੇ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਭੁੱਲ ਚੁੱਕ ਮਾਫ ਕਰੋ ਜੀ ਫਤਿਹ ਬੁਲਾਓ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ